I'm known for helping to change the way the world communicates. Before we assume it should be regulated or not regulated, let's see how it blooms.
If you look at blockchain and Bitcoin, just so happens it came into a marketplace heavily regulated. For 9 years, we kept voice over IP unregulated.
You know rappers like to rock chains. I rock blockchains, knock 'em out the box, I'm out docs, man. Key ring full of wallet.
I'm here in New Zealand at BlockchainSouth with the amazing Jeff Pulver. We just watched him give a presentation at the conference, which was spectacular, and I'm about to play that presentation for you, just as an introduction. So, Jeff, you are well known for your work in allowing the correct regulation and deregulation of VoIP technologies.
I'm known for helping to change the way the world communicates, and when innovation meets disruption, I try to make sure that I try to protect the future by not allowing people to encourage fear, uncertainty, and doubt in a technology revolution or evolution, to give the benefit of the doubt that the nuance of what we're looking at is something brand new. It may not fit into any category of what we're used to. So before we assume it should be regulated or not regulated, let's see how it blooms. And so what I'm very much trying to do in the blockchain space, as much as I've done in the history of internet communications, is to create a safe harbor and create a place where things can grow and be nascent and not be forced to grow up overnight and have a chance to figure out what they're going to become.
That's absolutely the most wonderful thing that you could hear, because there's so much talk about clamping down on this thing when it's really at its nascent stages, and that ability to provide a safe harbor so something can bloom is just so important. And now, when people use things like WhatsApp and FaceTime and all of these things, and they're using it for free, it's you that did that.
I help create the situation that supports it, and I very much help change the habits of people, because 14 years ago, it wasn't so common for people to pick up their phones, their apps, and basically engage in one-to-one or one-to-many conversations locally or with people around the world. And today, it's culturally the way things happen. We take it for granted. I mean, there was a time I remember in the 1960s where someone would call somebody else, and literally people would stop having sex if they're getting this call. Oh my God, somebody from New Zealand is calling us, stop everything.
Now people are just checking their phone during, I'm sure.
But because it doesn't matter, because they take it for granted, right? So something that's dramatic is getting everyone's attention. I mean, I remember growing up where I would wait patiently by my phone for someone to call me. Right. And it's like, because it mattered. And this is only Atlanta to New York. I mean, and overseas, it was just a dramatic moment. So being appreciative of this, so I do take credit for helping to facilitate the change. And it's really the change of culture that I help, because it's taken for granted so much right now. It's like people don't realize they're living in a world that's just different than the way it was a decade ago. Right. And it's not going back. And so in this ever-connected world where we're living and doing things we never could imagine before, but now it just seems so natural, the same thing's going to happen with what we call blockchain today. I mean, I do believe, technically speaking, blockchain and Bitcoin are the two most overhyped, misunderstood technologies in the history of mankind, but offer us the biggest potential at the same time, and they're not a conflict. One is just saying that we're not understood, that people just parrot what they hear, and they don't fully understand the impact of what it can do. And when I'm telling you the economic introduction of blockchain technologies in our lives will be worth so much more than the introduction of the internet to business. Right. Dramatically so. And so we're at the very early stages. If the internet's been around technically since the late 60s, went commercial in 94 to 95, we're living, in my opinion, pre-1991. We're at the edge of this disruption. But you know what? The people who give them, all the pioneers, a lot of credit, but frankly, it's so hard for people to get involved. Like in voice over IP, we used to call it the mother-in-law test, the mother test, the grandma test. Can someone pick up an internet-based phone and make a call? And the answer usually was no, until it was, of course, yes. And today, if you ask someone to get a non-Coinbase crypto to buy it for a relative, if my grandmother was alive, I don't think she would be able to do it. My mom would ask my sister. So we have a lot of friction just in the ecosystem. And the other thing is greed. Oh my goodness. For all the companies that are providing on-ramps and off-ramps, they're greedy people. And they're charging so much for something which I think, if they simply were to reduce the friction, they would have a lot more user adoption. They'd have a lot more ways to actually bring the masses into it. But they like having these roadblocks. They like having tolls. I like to be on highways with no tolls.
Well, Well, you were instrumental in really providing that safe harbor for VoIP technologies to be developed. Now you're being instrumental in also helping blockchain in the same way. And I'm very appreciative of all the work you're doing. And here is the presentation that Jeff gave earlier today. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for listening.
Going to be talking about the present as much as a little bit of the future, but also starting with the past. Because, when you look at history, if we don't learn from history, it has a tendency of repeating itself. And sometimes when you study history, or if you're doing any type of numerical analysis, if you're doing any type of trading, sometimes you're looking for patterns. And sometimes when it becomes predictive of those patterns, you could kind of see the future based on if everything else stayed constant. So I'm going to share a little bit about my history. Oh, if you can see that's the galactic center of the Milky Way. I photographed that last night. This actually is the center that's the center of our universe. It's about 23,000 million miles away. But that represents 1 billion stars. Every star averages to have 5 exoplanets, so you're kind of staring at 5 billion planets, which is another part of the conversation. We'll get to the very end. But for me, I've been involved in technology since I was young. And I've always been challenging it, being challenged by it. And when I look at what I have done, and so those of you who don't know what I've done, in some ways, I've helped change the way the world communicates so far. And I did not invent anything. I did things with technology. But if you think about the world you're living in today, because when I was growing up, if you're in New York and you're going to get a phone call from someone overseas or even from California, people actually set aside time for the call to happen. I can tell you, based on my own history, I happen to know that people would stop doing whatever activity it was to receive a call because it mattered. A phone call overseas was really costly. And now we're living in a world where people take for granted the ability to FaceTime from Auckland and Queenstown back to New York, back to California, back to Sydney. It's like no big deal that you can engage in conversations or one-to-one, one-to-many conversations on tablets, phones, laptops, and we don't even think twice about it. In 1964, the CEO, chairman of AT&T was at the World's Fair in New York, and he spoke about a vision of video communication. But nothing that AT&T could do for many, many, many years would ever bring that vision to fruition. It took many generations of change, plus technology innovation, and finally that moment in time happened, and then we just take that all for granted. Now, in the 1970s, that's the world that I grew up in. As much as I like to think it was pick a different decade, that was the world I grew up in. And I, as a young kid, I had a challenge that I don't know if any of you in your life, you've ever felt lonely, if you've ever been in school and didn't have too many friends, or perhaps you could see through people at a young age and didn't want to take their bullshit. Whatever the case, in the 70s, I was in elementary school, and I guess my parents felt bad for me. But what I'm about to explain to you is the reason how I ended up here today, and it sort of is a part of the long story about change and innovation. But for me personally, I was about 9 years old. I was trying to figure out whether it was 9 and a half, but about 9 years old. So in America, that's like 3rd grade, 4th grade. And my father was hounding me forever to call his brother, my Uncle Fred, to see him. And I don't know about you as a young kid, but me as a young kid, I would never listen to my parents, so I never called them. And but I was really having a hard time in school because I really did not have very many friends. And the people who were my friends disappointed me and said I'd rather be by myself than be with these people. And this is like in 3rd grade, so it's kind of weird, but I was very much aware of the world I was in. So one day I show up at home from school, and there's my Uncle Fred waiting to take me to his factory, because in the 1960s, my uncle was a pioneer in cable TV. He actually took a company public, building cable television test equipment. And he took me out to his factory, which was about an hour from my home, and took me for this factory tour. And it's like, okay, I'm a young kid, it's my uncle's company, of course everyone's nice to him, very unimpressed. But about toward the end of the tour, he brought me into his office, which was maybe the size of the stage, maybe. All I remember was being a room with a desk and a box on that desk. I didn't notice the microphone until after we sat down, but he flipped a switch and this box started to glow. Because this box had radio tubes in it, which I would learn later. And when he turned this box on, he heard voices, I just heard noise. And he would turn the dial on this radio to a certain spot where it was clear. And I was kind of mesmerized at that point. I was just like, what is this going on? And my uncle spoke a language which I learned later, which I'll translate for you in a moment, but he found a clear spot. And he said, CQ, CQ, this is K2, QQ, I'm calling CQ. And he repeated this and said again, CQ, CQ, this is K2, QQ, I'm calling CQ. And he repeated this for a minute, and he let go of the microphone. And for an hour, there were people from all over the world queuing up trying to talk to my uncle. So in ham radio lingo, CQ means seek you. And in Morse code, it's da 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 da, which, by the way, happens to be the bass line for many disco songs from the 70s. As I learned much later on, a lot of musicians were also into radio down then, and it was very much part of the culture. But da 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 da, just think about that when you go back and listen to your music archives. But so I'm there listening to my uncle call out basically seek you, and what I did not expect was that for everyone who was queuing up, no matter where in the world they were from, he would say his name was Fred, he was in Farmingdale, New York, and he gave a signal report about how loud or weak the person was in terms of strength. And these conversations were kind of brief, but they were from all over the place. And I was there for an hour, and what I realized is that my uncle had the cure for loneliness. See, all I needed to do was take this box off his desk and put it in my bedroom. And I could have friends before I went to school, and I could talk to people after school. And I'd be okay with that. But the gotcha was I couldn't just take that box home. My uncle would not let me. Because in America and many places in the world, you had to be licensed. You see, in order to be a ham radio operator, you actually had to take a series of tests. So I was 9 years old, and I basically had to teach myself college-level physics, Morse code, and then my first entry in the regulatory policy world, I had to read the Federal Communications Commission's Part 97.1 and actually learn the regulations of being an amateur radio operator. So growing up in that, when I was 9 years old, 10, I learned a lot about failure. And failure was not learning from failure. That's what I learned. I learned that if I didn't learn why I didn't succeed in doing something, that was the failure. But trying and failing was fine. So in my family, my father encouraged me to teach myself whatever I need to teach myself. And it took years. I didn't get my ham radio license until I was 12 and a half. But the moment I got my license to communicate, first of all, I haven't shut up since. And secondly, it actually changed my life. Because I actually had this radio in my bedroom, and I actually did speak to people all over the world before I went to school and after. And I was averaging about 40 to 60 hours a week on the radio. The fact that I actually went to school is just, I went to school. But I learned about being able to teach myself things. I learned back then what I'm passionate about. I learned about connecting. And I realized that we're unbounded as people as far as what we can do. If we take away the ability of, take the word can't and just drop the T and make can, you can do anything. And so I'm very fortunate to grow up in an environment where I was allowed to be obsessive about a hobby. But ultimately it was that passion to communicate that saved my life, that helped change and define who I was. And early on, one of the things, anyone here friends with anyone who's a ham radio operator? Ah, Patrick. So
I was one.
Very, wow.
Well, just
Wow. So there's a brotherhood of the other thing, but the thing about ham radio is that when you're 12 and a half years old and you're talking to people on the radio, no one wants to talk to you. Because you see, the average person on the radio was much older, and they would basically go online and they'd complain about their jobs, they'd complain about their wives. And I wasn't working, I didn't have a girlfriend, I was boring. So there were four things that I learned about being 12 and a half, trying to connect, which was to listen, to connect, to share, and engage. And if any of you ever needed a winning social media strategy, it's those 4 words that if you remember them, listen, connect, share, and engage, that's how you win in social media, because you actually want to be interesting, you want to connect, you want to listen to what the person has to say, and say something which brings on that conversation. And for me, the other thing I loved about amateur radio was being able to help out in times of disasters, to pass messages along. And then just the idea of bridging. Like I watched MASH, and I'm sure you've seen reruns of MASH, and Rita O'Reilly was not a role model for me. But I love the fact that he was in Korea, connecting servicemen overseas with loved ones. And so I enjoyed being in New York, listening for people looking to have a phone patch into New York. So people, let's say from Toronto or from Tel Aviv, they wanted to talk to someone in the States, I would actually bridge them on the radio and do a local handoff and make phone calls and then use the phone patch to connect it. And it worked. And as long as you didn't do it for business purposes, it was legal, it was fine, it was open. I spent a lot of time playing with phone patches, trying to understand. And back then, again, when you have $5 a minute rates, you could understand why people would find ways to bypass it. Lots of entrepreneurial businesses went into trying to bypass that stuff too. But for me, it was about the connection. It was about building those contacts. And as a kid, the one thing which I was fascinated with was when I went to university, I stayed local on Long Island because ultimately I got very much into coding due to my ham radio hobby, my obsession. Because back in the 70s into the 80s, when there was a Cold War, it was actually a sport, if you can believe this, called radio sport, East versus West, where people would turn their radios on Friday nights and keep them and compete for 48 hours straight to talk to as many people as possible around the world. The world was dropped into 40 different zones. You had countries, states, provinces in Canada, and it was an optimization model to figure out. So I learned to code basically to log and to compete in amateur radio. And so I was writing code. And so when I was in high school, I ended up starting 3 companies. One was a software development company. One was a DJ production company, because you see, as a kid with not much social life or social skills, the one thing I sometimes may have used my amateur radio for, and I believe I'm way past the statute of limitations, so I can admit this. But in the 70s, there was a book by Abby Hoffman called Steal This Book. Now, I don't know if any of you ever read that book or know about Alt.2600 or maybe subscribed to Tap Magazine or may have not have built red boxes, blue boxes, or know what a Captain Crunch whistle is. But basically, there was a time we could emit a certain tone and get a long-distance dial tone. Just saying. And occasionally, being bored, I might have taken my amateur radio and put on 41 meters instead of 40 meters, and then started a shortwave radio station, where I engaged my sisters to be the folks listening. So in America, for 9X, for the local phone network, if you call 212-976-9977, you get this horrible tone heard. And if you call 212-976-9979, the tone goes away, and the 2 lines were connected. The phone network, the phone engineers use that for testing circuits. That particular loop line went to a phone booth traced to a phone booth in the South Bronx. When I started my shortwave radio station, I would use those loop lines to take requests, thinking people would actually tune into me. And my sisters were traumatized growing up because I told them 2 things. If you ever see a white van, run like hell, but get me first. And so to this very day, they still are traumatized by them whenever they see white fans. And so as a pirate radio station, I only operated on stormy winter nights on Long Island and on federal holidays, figuring that if it was a stormy winter night, who's going to come out after me? And if it's a federal holiday, that's holiday, so who cares? So I only had about 5 to 10 broadcasts a year. So by the way, anyone want to guess what nefarious industries might have been using loop lines in the 70s? And?
Who? We can't hear it.
Okay, so it's gambling, prostitution, and drug running. So yes, those 3. So when my sister was when I was on the air trying to promote, so I was WARG. I was from somewhere on the East Coast. The WARG coming to you live. And I was Ray Haber, and I did it for a long time. And so I would take requests, and I would buy vinyl every time someone wants to play a track that I didn't have. I'd go out and buy records. So what do you do with a record collection? So girls who would not invite me to the Sweet 16s would invite me to DJ their parties. And so my first actual business I ever started was a DJ production company, which ironically is still in business today. A friend of mine now, well, it's his business now, but we started together when we were 15 years old. And my passion for music runs deep. But you see, back in those days before I had my ham radio license, when I was looking for friends, I was so lonely that I would actually adopt the music of the people I was trying to connect with to find something in common with them. It wasn't until I was later in my teenage years that I actually found music that I liked. But I was very much into the connection and very much into trying to find that human bond between people, between things. And that's been sort of my motivating drive my entire life. And then it came around 1980, I went to college. I didn't want to go to school. I had a big fight. My father applied to a university and I went to it and he got in, but it was okay because it was me. But it was basically, I think, his application. But it worked. And I do have an accounting degree, although I never practiced accounting, which is really good for anyone who is an accountant. You can appreciate that. I'm gainfully unemployed. But in 1980, though, the summer going into my freshman year in school, I figured out a way within a 30-mile radius of where I lived to get my ham radio to give me dial tone. So I had a mobile phone in 1980 in my car using a phone patch. And I was so proud of my achievement that when I was on campus trying to meet girls, I was trying to get them to come into my car to check out my phone patch. And don't go there. Now I'll fast forward. But the world that I grew up in fact, was about all about tech, but all about connecting. And after school, when I was still in university, my father had a Data General mini computer in our house. And I basically broke into his computer to learn how to code. Now my first experiences in coding was actually when I was in 5th grade. We had a teletype machine in my parents' house. We had a 110 baud modem. And I would use basically, so I've been dialing into time steering services since 110 baud to 300 baud to 1200, then all the way to 9600, what a revelation. And I learned to code because I wanted to code, but I got into the consulting business because these systems engineers would come to my parents' house and see me at the console and realize I actually understood what was going on. And so my mom used to draw, so when I was 16 years old, my mom drove me to consulting gigs. To basically, I got connected to the systems engineers at Data General, and then I noticed that the language didn't have any floating point arithmetic. So I started a software publishing company going into my senior year to actually add floating point arithmetic to Data General Business Basic. And so I didn't want to go to university because I was actually having fun. And so my father insisted I go to college, which I did. And so when I left, I basically started a company called Spreadsheet Solutions, and I ended up very accidentally becoming an expert in fixed income mathematics and fixed interest mathematics, and that's what I did. And from that I got involved with real-time market data and ended up working on Wall Street, basically selling to Wall Street, trading buy-side, sell-side, and got very much involved in all of that. And the thing about ham radio is that it's open. There's a brotherhood that wherever I went to in the world, ham radio, we're instant friends. It's like instant trust. It's like implied trust, sort of like with blockchain. You have implied trust because it's just there. And in a world where you're sometimes told don't talk to strangers, all I ever did was talk to strangers. All I ever did was, I was so maybe lonely or open that I would talk to anyone that would talk to me, and amateur radio was like the key opener to it. And so I ended up selling my first business, Spreadsheet Solutions, to Cantor Fitzgerald Securities in 1993. And I went from working for myself to working for someone else, which for me, didn't work out so well. I don't know if any of you are misfits. I discovered when I was a young kid I was a misfit. I did not fit in. I didn't fit in. I understand it's challenging to work in an environment where you don't fit in, but you deal with it because you're so tolerant of pain and torture. It's the inertia, really. But being able to find your place takes a lifetime sometimes. And for me, the only reason why I sold my business to Cantor was because a friend of mine became chief information officer there, and he saw what I was doing building out my business, and he asked me, do I want a real job? And I didn't quite understand what that was, but at the time, to my parents' credit, for anyone who ever worked for me, my father backed me. So whenever I could make payroll, he did. So I had this, because he figured if someone's crazy enough to work for a 22-year-old, they will be paid. But when I sold my business to Cantor, my father was okay about that, but he warned me, but I didn't understand what that meant. And then I got a 3-year job in a life lesson in office politics. So I went from having 27 people working for me to having one person working for me to ultimately nobody and then one person. And I appreciate all that, but what magically happened to me around that time, so growing up on ham radio though, in 1972, when I was really getting into this communication thing, there was an application which I was really fascinated with called Pong. Has anyone ever played Pong? So if you remember Pong, and I want to go back to it, Pong was the first creation from Atari. It was, yes?
I'm sorry, I'm fascinated by that response. He asked how many people had played Pong?
Not many.
Not many. Interesting. Well, I guess I'm a lot older than I thought.
But the thing is, Pong sort of gave us the modern day gaming industry. Pong gave us ultimately what evolved into AR, VR. Pong gave us the ability for deep military applications to be used in gamification. Pong gave us a lot. It was a challenge by Norman, by the founder of Atari, to someone else. That's how it actually came into fruition. And it was really an application running on a chipset, connected to a television in black and white, and all it did was play table tennis. And if you think about it, Pong happened to be created in a marketplace that was not disrupting anyone else. Minding its own business, it opened up the theater in our homes to start to interact with something else other than each other, other than the television itself. It gave us an interactive base. If you look at blockchain and Bitcoin, from my perspective, I look at it as Pong. That basically the chipset's the blockchain, Bitcoin is the application, Pong. Just so happens it came into a marketplace heavily regulated, sometimes misunderstood with intentions, but it was a proof of concept. That was 1972. The internet, with DARPANET started in 1969. It took many, many years of research, development, and failure to learn from stuff. Most things we depend on in our daily lives wasn't invented, it was someone else's good mistake. Most things we go out to do like when you're an inventor or a creator, sometimes you can see those good mistakes. But other than deep research in science or medical research and stuff, and even medical research, it's the mistakes people make that they stumble upon that gives us that aha that this is special. So Pong starts that path. I start my path with communications. And in 1994, I'm working on Wall Street, and I read about some software coming out that lets you communicate on the internet. It was called See You See Me. Just to set the pace. How many people here use See You See Me? So for those who don't know what I'm talking about, this is a black and white screen. Forget about Netflix, pre-Netflix. Talking about a little square, 120 by 160, black and white. We're getting 3, 4, 5, 7 frames per second video, and that was wow. So I was actually connected to those folks at Cornell University that were playing with this. Then on that mailing list, I learned about software that you could download that would be available in February of 1995, called Internet Phone, which when I downloaded it, I was amazed. Because you see, I downloaded this software because I was on the CUC mailing list. And when it's like the February 12th, 1995, it came out, and 20% of the people online were using their ham radio call signs as their aliases. And when I realized that there was a new brotherhood, there are these people pretending to be ham radio operators. Well, we're ham radio operators pretending to use amateur radio lingo, or on the computer, talking to each other around the world. And it just happened. And so we were able to, it was our name, our location, and my call sign. And I was talking to people as if I was on amateur radio. But we did not need antennas or radio propagation. We didn't need anything but a microphone, dial-up, and a computer, and it just worked. We had half duplex sound cards back then, if you could even imagine that. So it was not even full duplex. And I very innocently started a mailing list so that people who were offline could talk to each other and discover each other online. And my background was maybe accounting, maybe I was a hacker. I don't have the time to tell you what I really did in 5th grade, but I got into a little bit of trouble. But I enjoyed the idea of connecting people and connecting dots. And so I created this mailing list. And in September 1995, somebody asked a very simple question: is it possible to interconnect a telephone and a computer? It was from a guy in Italy. And I responded yes, because I took out that phone patch that was very embarrassing in 1980 when I was in college. I dusted it off, literally connected it to my computer, and it worked. I got dial tone. And then I got an offline message from a guy in Jakarta, Indonesia, who, for those engineers in the room, back in 1995, there were 2 chipsets for modems that were very popular. One was Cirrus Logic, one was Brockwell. If you happen to be using a Cirrus Logic chipset modem, this guy wrote to the APIs in the modem, and it actually gave you dial tone. So if you had 2 modems in your computer, one for dial-up access, the other one gave you dial tone. And using the APIs from Vocaltech, the company I used to talk on the internet, we hacked, by cross-connecting sound cards and this other stuff, we hacked the ability to get a dial-out phone line. And in the next month, I launched something called Free World Dialup. It was free, it connected the world, and it ran on dial-up. And this was completely revolutionary. So in 1995, there were 16 million people on the internet. And never in my life did I ever expect to see so much press and media coverage. But when I launched Free World Dialup, very innocently, we had no business plan, we had no intentions of having a business. It was myself, a friend in Jakarta, a friend in Tokyo. And we launched this, it went viral around the internet. It was just nuts. By November 1995, on the back page, on the front page of the Sunday Times in London, was a story about Bill Gates and the road ahead. On the back page was a story about free world dial-up and the threat to the future of BT. It's really funny reading, but nobody was laughing. And I had one of the biggest fights of my life with my dad over that weekend because he told me I should cash out and take advantage of my presence. And I told my dad one day it will happen, but now is not the time to do that. And then so I had a day job on Wall Street. I was actually working in systems. I was an IT guy. I was responsible for new innovations. We had 1,000 people at Cantor, 150 in systems, 149 responsible for keeping things the way they are. The one guy responsible for change was me. I was the internet guy. And back in '95, by the way, it was an offense that you can get fired on the spot if you were caught putting an IP-enabled device on the production network during trading hours. You could not do that. I didn't have many friends in systems because I was trying to bring new tech in, and that was a hard part. But I had this opportunity, though, to at least explore at night. And so I launched Free Will Dial-Up, minding on my own business. On my mailing list in March of '96, everything exploded. Why? Because 300 phone companies went to the Federal Communications Commission and asked for the sale and use of internet telephony software to be banned in America, and the makers to be regulated as phone companies. And it's like, oh my God. So there were people on this mailing list, 3,000 people at that point, and I don't know anything about telecom. I wasn't professing to have any knowledge about any of this, but I was watching this go by, and people were saying to me, what was I going to do about it? And in that moment in time, my standing in Washington was pretty simple. I had none. I'm a ham radio operator. I understand Part 97 of the FCC rules. What am I going to do? And so it took 10 days, but it went to the mailing list, and this never happened before in the history of the internet, and never happened in the history of lobbying in Washington before. But I asked people, would they join a coalition? So in 1995, anyone could get any kind of domain. So I had a domain called VON that stood for Voice on the Net, on Video on the Net, or whatever you wanted to make it. But I had VON.com, VON.org, and everything else, and I decided, okay, I'll create the Voice on the Net coalition. And then we got 110 people to join in a very short period of time. And we just put out a statement that we're against the ACTA petition. Now, afterwards, I met people at the FCC who had never seen this ever before in the history of what they were doing. And so, whoa, it turned out the ACTA petition was stopped. And for 9 years, and the Voice on Net Coalition still exists today. I'm the chairman emeritus to that. And for 9 years, we kept voice over IP unregulated. And the argument back then was if it quacks like a duck and looks like a duck, it's probably a duck. I said, no, it was born on the internet. You just don't understand. Just because from your eyes it should be regulated doesn't mean it can be regulated or should be regulated. So we had a safety spot. What I never imagined was that I would actually become the founder of a trade association, promoting a technology, and along the way, I just didn't want my hobby to go away. I really enjoyed running Free World Dial-Up. I really enjoyed helping people from around the world connect to each other, bypass tariffs, because the way Free World Dial-Up worked was every city around the world, we had a node. You basically, and by the way, it was very non-scalable because I was buying the extra modems for people. So if you sign up on the mailing list saying, I want to run a node for Free World Dial-Up, we had a FedEx office at One World Trade, I would send everyone a modem. And when you connected up, you allowed for some period of time, whether it's 2 minutes a day up to whatever time you want, your node to be available for dial-out traffic. And so we had up to 500 nodes running around the world. And from many cities and no cities, but over the last 20-something years, I've run into so many of the people who I sent these modems to, because no one really understood I did it from passion. And it turns out when you start businesses from passion and no business model, and you're not scalable, you can end up and bring dramatic change forward. It turned out I got very lucky in America because there was no regulation at the FCC for free services. If people were to charge a fraction of a penny for every call that went out, we would have been shut down. In fact, I would have perhaps not gone to jail, but these people would have been regulated as reselling a utility without a resale license. Lots of fines for that. But for being fucking crazy, no sign for that. No fine for that. But anyway, what happened for me, which I just want to just bring this to the next step, is doing Free World Dial-Up and showing the world what was possible, called bullshit on a lot of hype that was out there too. But I kind of did this independently because I had a day job. But I don't know if any of you have ever been in a work environment in corporate world, wherever you may be in, where you knew you were going to get fired, you just didn't know when. Because I had 17 managers at one point, all of us from systems. We start going out for Friday lunches. Then there were 14 of us. Then there were 12 of us. Then there were 7 of us. So we had this ominous feeling that we're not going to make it. which saved our lives ultimately. But you know, it was a very dramatic feeling when I showed up at a systems meeting in right after the American holiday, 4th of July holiday in '96. I show up at a meeting, all hands on meeting, 2 co-managers running systems. They hand out an org chart. I was the person in the back raising my hand. Yes, Jeff? I said, there's a typo on the list, on that org chart. What's wrong? I'm not on it. And then one co-manager said to the other co-manager, didn't you fire him? The other one, didn't you fire him? So that's how I found out I got fired. And I had the kind of job where I could last the entire summer and no one would have noticed I wasn't there, or I was still on the payroll. But no, I spoke up. But that feeling of being fired, and I had broadband internet service to my house, so I knew the internet was going to be big. So I was paying more for connectivity than my mortgage. But I couldn't figure out how I was going to continue doing my passion because I had no savings. And my dad, who was kind enough to me during the years of me running my software company, was not there to support me at all. He said, figure it out. And so what I figured out is I didn't want to go back to working on Wall Street. I decided to I wanted to do my passion. So I decided to host a conference to bring together people who had a shared common interest to help change the world, to help see the future of communications as undefined. And what I ended up doing was doing an event in New York City at the Puck Building in Soho on September 10th and 11th, 1996. But there's a little bit of a trick to it though. I needed $15,000 for a deposit. No one I went to, whether I went to a venture fund for money, no one said yes to me, nobody. So luckily when I was on Wall Street I had an Optima card. I actually drew down $15,000, all the credit I had in traveler's checks, back then traveler's checks. I went to the Puck Building and I gave them the deposit, and to my utter surprise, 224 people from around the world showed up on those dates. Some of those people started companies that would have multi-billion-dollar market caps even within a year. But what I found was a group of soulful people who believed in a future. They understood disruption. They understood the internet was happening, and they could not explain what was actually going to happen because of it. But it happened in a very, very big way. And I was very quiet back then. I actually didn't speak at that conference. I was too shy. But I was very happy to connect the dots and to connect with these people and see how lives were starting to change. And I was the guy running the free World Dialup. So I was kind of like this mystical person that did not know who I was, because I had this, it's like my pirate radio days. I had, yes, hi, it's Ray here, we're coming to you live from somewhere on the East Coast, and next up is, what was next up? I don't know, it might have been Deep Purple, might have been Led Zeppelin. It was definitely something deep from the UK, and it was fun, because it was about connecting with those people. But when I'm doing something disruptive, like doing what I thought Abby Hoffman would do, where someone would actually just go set up gateways, I never realized that was the future of voice over IP. But very fortunately for me, I ended up doing by accident. And so if any of you have any doubt that you need a license to do something, you don't. The only thing you ever need is blind faith in yourself. When I worked on Wall Street, one of the biggest mistakes I ever made in my life was listening to the people around me. Because I had an idea a long time ago, back in '94, to do HTML-based email. I thought that would be kind of cool. But the people who worked near my cube said it was a stupid idea, so I didn't pursue it. I had this other idea to do online mortgage brokering. Bad idea, I didn't pursue that. When I finally realized I needed new friends, because I let other people decide my fate. I let other people decide what I should do. And I had to take ownership of who I was. Which, I spent my entire life not even knowing who I am, but finally figuring out that I could do things so that I just can. I don't need to be educated. It's passion, luck, and opportunity. I like to think that it's laziness, but smart laziness that helps drive innovation. And I think that being unbounded and understand, just because you don't have a degree in something doesn't mean you're not qualified to do something. Because you could actually do anything you want. And what happened with me, which was just crazy, is this conference business ended up being a smashing success, even though I knew nothing about running conferences. So I created my own culture, and it just worked. And along the way, I started a few companies. The whole idea of Free World Dialup turned out to be, I didn't file any patents for this, unfortunately, but it turned out that many other people did. And the entire early days of voice over IP were entrepreneurs putting computers in different locations around the world and building bridges, bypassing the internet tariffs, and having local hop-on, hop-off email. I was, back in '97, I was actually in Sydney because Ozymail launched. I was friendly with those guys, and I was on I was on a current affair. I remember being in current affair in Sydney, and it was really funny because in 24 hours I was interviewed by the Financial Review. I was on ABC there, and I was on a current affair, which ran in different provinces all over Australia for about 2 weeks. Got a lot of new nodes up there at that point. But they thought I was competing with Ozymail, which I wasn't. I was just trying to show people what you can do. And ultimately, I very accidentally created a company called the Minutes Exchange in 98. When there were a lot of B2B companies going on, I decided that one day there'd be a future for spot markets, and that I created a spot market for voice over IP. But in the year 2000, I got so jealous of all these people with these exits, all these .com companies. I was one of the original .coms, Pulver.com. I wasn't going public, I wasn't doing anything. So I decided that this Minutes Exchange should be real. So I managed to actually meet somebody who knew somebody that started Daytech Online and started the Island ECN, companies which maybe you're familiar with. I was introduced to Jeff Citron. And it took about 6 months, but I hired him, which was a very interesting hire. And I'll just leave it at that. But I shared the idea about being a Minutes Exchange. And I shared with him the next startup I wanted to do was a broadband phone company. And after I incubated them in my office for 8 months, they moved out to Edison, New Jersey. So I figured Jersey's where you should have telecom. Long Island's good for aerospace. And he told me that they decided to change the name of the company from the Minutes Exchange to Vonage, where Vonage was the age of voice on the net. So I'm the Von of Vonage. And I very accidentally started that company. And that's actually publicly traded and doing pretty okay now. But it was a very surreal moment of just seeing that become real. And for me, so that happened, and I had a good exit with my conference business, but 2003 was a strange time for me, because you see, I sold my business on September 10th, 2001, because I don't know if any of you get premonitions. I don't know if any of you ever act on premonitions or even publicly would admit that you get premonitions, but I do. And in the year 2000, at the end of 2000, I was in Florida on a family holiday, and a competitor calls my phone from a number I didn't even recognize. It's rare for me to answer my phone from a cell number I don't know. But someone asked me what my exit strategy was. I had to confess, what's an exit strategy? Because at that moment in time, I actually started a record label, I had a production company, I was producing concerts, I was having conferences. I was having the best time of my life. I was running a bunch of businesses in parallel, and it was fun. So I said to myself, why should I sell my business? But I took that as a sign from God that I should sell a business. So I spent 2001, which was my best year ever, through June, looking for a buyer. Finally, the buyer was in LA. The deal literally closed on September 10th. Then 9/11 happened, so I went from total elation to being in Atlanta on 9/11, and what the fuck? And then I realized how grateful I was to be alive, because 700 people died at the company I worked for. And I had the kind of job in systems where I very much could have died. In fact, my mother and my sister got a phone call that I died. They only told me this 3 years ago. And my sister was trying to explain to the person at Cantor that no, I was very much alive, I was in Atlanta, and they thought my sister was in shock. But I really feel bad, because one person, Bill Gardner, who I hired, when I did Vonage, and I took a lot of people out of Cantor to do that, he stayed. So I'm forever responsible for him. But then September 12th was my birthday. So it was like 3 crazy days of my life. And but I was so grateful to be alive and so grateful to be in that moment. And for me, when I looked toward the future, so we waited for back in 2001, that was post.com crash, sort of. We had a telecom crash, we had all this other stuff. And for 17 months, I was absolutely depressed and miserable because I sold my business, the thing I loved. But luckily, 17 months later, 2 weeks before the company I sold my business to went bankrupt, I bought my business back. And I was able to do those conferences for another few years and build it up from a 0 EBITDA to about 7 million EBITDA over 3 years. So I was kind of happy about that. But in 2003, I had another premonition that the phone companies would wake up and realize how disruptive broadband would be to their future. And I was responsible to save the future. And I actually testified this. It's kind of weird to tell people that you're from the future trying to save the past mistakes, but I did. And I contacted the lawyers who I hired for the Von Coalition. I said, hey guys, can we be proactive this time? Can we actually go after the phone companies and look for clarity? They said, sure. So it took 5 weeks to write a brief, And what I asked for was regulatory clarity that voice communication starts on the broadband internet should not be regulated as telecom. Pretty simple to ask. And sure enough, we filed this. It took 5 weeks. The attorney called me up that day and said, "Congratulations, we're filed." I said, "When does the fight start?" He says, "What fight?" And then they waited till then to say, "Jeff, if you hear Martian signals in your ears, you could file a petition at the FCC, but I guarantee you they probably will not put it out for public comment, but you could do whatever you want." I said, "Oh no." But then it's like, be careful what you wish for, because 10 days later, the FCC put my petition out for public comment. And for those of you who have not been through a petitioning cycle, I had 30 days of piss on Jeff Pulver month. My integrity as a human being was attacked worldwide. The integrity of the merits of the petition were attacked. Everybody was against it, basically. And for why? But I had a chance to respond back, but then in May of 2003, 2 organizations which I don't really, I was in shock what to do. The Department of Justice and the FBI went after me. You see, they said that the Free World Dialup petition, no, it's just a cover for Al-Qaeda. You are trying to block broadband wiretaps. We cannot allow this to happen. Like, the NSA, hello? But they didn't talk about the NSA back then. But it turned out in 2003, the US government reacquired certain property from MCI. And the craziest meeting of my life happened when I had 10 people from my office show up at an unmarked building in downtown Washington, which is a former MCI building. You go to the 2nd floor of this building, and it's a computer crimes division. First time in my life I'm thinking I'm on the set of Law & Order. And I go in this building, I sit down, 3 people from the government are there, but only 2 people introduce themselves, which was really freaking nuts. And the 3rd person, who never was identified, said, "Hi, we're not here to discuss the merits of your petition. Our comments are of public record, but do you mind answering a few questions?" I was like, "Okay." And then our CTO was there, and I felt terrible for this guy. Ed Guy was his name, so I felt terrible for this guy. I meant Ed. And he's sitting there, sweating bullets. I think after about 20 minutes, he must have shed about he shed, 2 pounds of water weight, just totally there. So I jumped up and said, "Guys, listen. If you think Free World Dialup will help you get Al-Qaeda, it's yours. Take it, host it, whatever you want. If you want to put hooks in there, it's yours, whatever you want." I'm looking at each other, what the fuck? And I'm like, they did not expect me to donate this asset to the government. I should tell you, by the way, after 9/11, whatever meager logs I had, I gave them all to the FCC. I gave them all to the government to help track down the bad guys. And so I was there because I wanted them to understand I was not a bad guy. I was a strange guy, but not a bad guy. And I was there. So anyway, the meeting ended, and I only had 1 hug, but I got 1 hug from the government, and I thought it was okay. And then the next day was like a surreal day because I went to the White House. I was at the West Wing of the White House. President Bush had a telecom czar, Richard somebody. And by the way, after this whole thing with the FBI and DOJ, we were so burnt out that we had our PA pitch the guy from the White House. Because it's like we've been doing this forever. So this woman, really nice, smart girl, she pitched this guy from the White House, and he listened to all our things and said, "Yes, President Bush is behind Free World Dialup. It would be good for broadband in America." We're looking at each other. And I should mention that where we were in the West Wing was he had glass windows. I mean, his entire wall, at least the room we were in, it was all glass. And the elevator we came up was like just a 2-story elevator, but it was like very, very close by. And so we're like after the day before, it's like, we're done. This is crazy. So he yesed us, and we're very happy we were leaving. And then as he saw the doors to the elevator close on our party, he opened his doors and said, "Thank you for not asking for subsidies." I'm saying, fuck, we could have gotten subsidies from the government. What idiots are we? What idiots are we? And so we're there. And then anyway, 9 months later, at the February 12th FCC hearing, as it was in 2004, the son of Colin Powell, Michael Powell, issued something called the Pulver Order. I became a subject now in Washington, for real. And the Pulver Order is the reason why Facebook, Microsoft, Apple, and Google are not regulated as telecom providers, and why everyone is able to use apps on those platforms for free. And it turns out that the Pulver Order is honored in over 100 countries around the world. And for many people, voice is not voice, is voice. And that we were able to create a clarity and a safe haven because we asked for it. If we didn't stand up and make that work, it wouldn't have. So it took someone to stand up and to do stuff. And my contributions to creating that environment came more from helping to bring people together. Because you see, with voice over IP, It's a very complicated protocol. It was invented in 1980 in the Israeli Defense Forces. It took until the early 90s for it to be commercialized. But the one thing I used to do at my conferences was help to homogenize protocols. People from large companies with big egos showed up, and everybody was working on trying to make it work right. But imagine if you had 100 phone networks where each phone network could not talk to each phone network. That's actually what happened in America originally, when we had no interoperability. But we didn't have operability. And so what I was able to do behind the scenes was to find a way to find common ground when it was possible, to enable the engineers to talk to each other and to find ways to align our business interests together. Even if we were competing, we needed to have co-opetition in order to have competition. We needed to have an open mind to have a marketplace to grow. And so one of the things I was able to do through the Vaughn conferences was I learned very early on that if I have open bar for 7 hours for an all-night party, hire a band that's playing on the radio, and basically learn to take having fun seriously, everything else just magically just works out. And so I did that. And it was really a very special moment. But I'll tell you, back in 2002, right before I did the Pulver Order, I got on the cases of everyone in the industry. Because you see, it took from, let's say, 96 to 2002 for this stuff to be taken seriously. But all these major vendors, I mean, I remember a meeting in 1997, the CTO of AT&T who says, we don't play with toys. We're never going to employ voice over IP because it's just a toy, it doesn't work. Then 2 years later, it's like, they're at my conference giving a keynote. It's like, okay, you got it. And the thing was, for me, is I was so fucking annoyed with this industry. You see, unlike other industries, telecom folks, they do replication, not innovation. Imagine being a doctor. You know, in 2003, they were using technology from the 60s. In fact, the codecs we use for the voice compression comes back from the 1930s. I helped introduce HD voice in America, but that didn't happen until after 2010. But in 2002, I was on the cases of everybody in the industry running a phone network, deploying billions of dollars of hardware, because all they were doing was replacing one piece of equipment with another and not innovating anything. So I called that process black and white minutes. I called everyone out, and I said, what you should be doing is purple minutes. You should be using this technology to create things never before practical or possible. Otherwise, you're just wasting time. And it took a long time for the industry to go purple, but they did. And today, a lot of the services you're seeing on the internet where you're interactive, those are representations of things we could never do before. People tried and failed, but now we have a platform that enables us to do all that. And so, and it was kind of weird that Purple Minutes is referenced on Wikipedia, but then my page was taken down. But the concept is there about being purple, at least being different, about owning the responsibility of trying to be both leveraging what was never before practical or possible in the present. And so it's like, why am I here today? So I shared with you this story for a reason, besides the fact I enjoy telling it. I really left a lot of the good stuff out, but I just wanted to create a foundation that I've experienced life in a different way than others. I've appreciated how technology can change things. I've also seen ways that technologies can avoid, that people who do not engage make mistakes which they can't go back in time. But we're living in a moment in time right now that's perhaps more glorious than we ever had. For those of you who have creative minds and want to be opportunistic, much bigger than the dot-com days. I mean, I saw friends of mine go bankrupt. I saw the first internet millionaires and billionaires happen. There's no doubt in my mind that there's be someone maybe in this room waking up real soon, or maybe after the winter's over, and say that they're the first trillionaires. Great, whatever. What you're going to do with $1 trillion, I have no idea. But it's possible it can happen. But it will not happen. It will not happen unless we collectively work together to affect positive change, to help build an industry amongst you. So we're sitting in this room. The reason I said yes to coming here is I actually have a vested interest in trying to positively disrupt another marketplace. I do believe that as much as no one in this conference is going to talk about TCP/IP, I know a few people here have been around, and we're not going to talk about our problems with UUCP either and getting our gateways up to interconnect on email in the 80s or in the 90s with CompuServe. We're not going to go there. We're not going to talk about Oasis or Gopher, but it was in 1991 that HTTP came out. And then that was HTTP 1.0. very shortly thereafter, HTTP 1.1 came out, but it took several years for it to actually be as widespread adopted as 1.0 was. That was the World Wide Web. Where we're sitting now today in this era of blockchain, and those of you who are on the computer who maybe came onto the internet at a certain time, you may remember having to load TCP/IP drivers. Back in corporate America, we had NetBEUI, NetBIOS. TCP/IP was not a winner, but it became a winner for those who wanted to build on the internet. The thing about all the hacking you've seen, that continues to be seen, is because TCP/IP was built on trust. It was built on trust. The actual core protocols are open. And so it's trust-based systems in a world that doesn't have a lot of trust. And then you have applications on top of that. But what the internet did give us basically is we went from 16 million people in 1995 to 3 billion plus now. So I will tell you that in 1995, voice over IP was the most overhyped, misunderstood technology in the history of mankind. I'll tell you in 2018, blockchain and Bitcoin are the most overhyped, misunderstood technologies in the history of mankind. Mostly because the echo chamber has gotten much bigger. But the opportunities have never been bigger either. And what we have the challenge to do is to figure out how to work together, how to affect positive change to make the practical systems we are disrupting to be more effective, more efficient. Because in the world of finance, it's going to be 1966 meets 2019 real soon. Because from a practical reality perspective, being able to trade and clear settlement to clear trades, together with the opportunity to enable trading, we can do some of it, but we don't have the practical realities for all of it. So when I teamed up with Stephen and partnered with Stephen Nareyoff, who helped make Ethereum what it is and helped define the modern day ICO, I realized there was a lot of darkness in crypto. In fact, I never say crypto, I always say blockchain. Because I really believe that as much as we talk about TCP/IP, I do anyway, as being a foundation protocol that everything else is run on top of, in the near future, no one's going to be talking about blockchain. Sorry. It's going the way of the chipsets. It's going to go into chips. It's going to the operating systems. We're going to be able to build applications through and through where you're going to be able to have integrity and trust in everything. Trustless, if you will. At the same time, by the way, I just want to give you a little timeline. In 1972, Pong was a great innovation. We did not quite understand what was going on with it, but it was the foreshadowing of a huge industry. I believe the launch of Bitcoin is a foreshadowing of a huge industry, and if you think the only opportunity is in finance, you're fucking crazy. I believe that we're going to have a triumvirate of multiple ways and multiple sectors to figure this out, not just finance, although it could be a $4 quadrillion opportunity in finance, but the advent of blockchain businesses will go across all market sectors. All market sectors, and it's not a US phenomenon, it's not a New Zealand phenomenon, it's a worldwide phenomenon. But it does represent the next phenomenal growth opportunity which we're now living in, which we're all grateful, I am anyway, to be in that marketplace. But what I did in March of this year is I created a trade association proactively, looking to promote best practices. Very simply put, I saw what went down with telecom. I saw that voice over IP was trying to be boxed, because when people don't understand things, they put boxes around it to try to like no one can understand me, so all these adjectives describe me, but I'm still who I am. I still own my space. And people are described with words, companies are described with words, but it doesn't always reflect what it is. As an enabling technology, blockchain is not, I'll put it differently, the Securities and Exchange Commission was not born on the internet. It just wasn't. I had to deal with the Communications Act of 34. In finance, you're dealing with 33, 34, and 40. The Howey test was from the 1940s? I mean, come on. It's a great story to hear about why it happened, but it doesn't necessarily apply in today's modern age. But people in telecom, they replicate, they don't innovate. When I was sitting on the board of a soft switch vendor in 1999, I lost my board seat because I got so frustrated, because I said, if this was medicine, and you studied in school in the 1960s, and you didn't change your methods by the 1990s, you're killing people. You're killing people. And the thing is, in telecom, innovation comes very slowly. Finance also comes very slowly until it happens and smacks you in the face. And so we have an opportunity today to actually be that change. We have the opportunity today to actually affect positive change. So in March of this year, with the help of Patrick and Fran and a few others, and Banksaurus, and I created at the time called the Securities Token Association, the STA, with the idea of bringing people from around the world together to promote best practices. Because what I was seeing in Miami, at BTC Miami, was crazy. Besides all the federal people there from government who I ran into very innocently, I saw people breaking the law. So I decided to create an association that basically stood up for the law. One of my early projects on the internet was Edgar Online. I provided a way for people who wanted to see people who filed information to actually get it out and extract it out. And so I thought, wouldn't it be cool to have an association that says, you know what, best practices include supporting AML KYC, complete transparency. So that means that if you have financials, share them. That if you have bank statements, share them. If you agree, and also to agree to no money, to basically no front running and no insider trading. Just file for it, damn it. I mean, because for me, an ICO is not about a coin, it's about the crowd. You see, if you look at the etymology of how ICOs happened, it's on the heels of Kickstarter and Indiegogo. So for me, an ICO is going to the crowd, going to your community, which you only could have had because of the internet, and raising funds through that. So why not be open to sharing with your crowd how you're doing? Have complete transparency. When I met with a former SEC chairman, when I asked him to join the STA, he asked me, what would I do about Tether? Because he says, you don't want to necessarily be a shaming organization, but he says, make it possible for people to share their financials, and then people could draw their own conclusions. So I started down that path, and at the time when Bitcoin was $10,000 and Ethereum was $1,000, I put together an 18-month budget to go around the world, to be a lobbying organization in Washington, to be understood, but really to help promote the goodwill of what we do. But then by May I realized I made a tragic error. Friends of mine that had done ICOs did not want to be stigmatized with the Security Token Association because they don't want to be regulated as a security. It's like, fine. So I changed the name of the organization from the Security Token Association to the Blockchain Token Association. We're the Rainbow Coalition for all tokens. You know, if you're born as security, you associate a utility, it's fine by us. If you're born as a purple security, it's fine by us. We're here to promote you goodwill, and really to figure out how to make this stuff work. And I'm a fan of what Fran is doing with T0, creating a protocol, trying to solve a business issue of operability and interoperability for the issuance of tokens, and ultimately the seamless trading of tokens. And it's no doubt there will be many ATSs around the world that spring up. I keep on running into people that are running exchanges. But we should take advantage of this moment in time to work together, to put aside our differences, because we will be competitive, but first we have to build a market. We have to have co-opetition, then competition. But know your competitors. Let's work together to build it up. What I am throwing my hat in the ring to do is to help facilitate this. There's a lot of meetings that have to take place both on the business side and the technical side to work out the issues, because there are business challenges with everybody, because you see the market a little differently. And then to implement the protocol takes engineering work. And I'm all in to help facilitate that. I'm also all in to make sure that we're not necessarily misunderstood. In the past 3 weeks, I've been to 2 meetings in the United States. One weekend I spent with the Department of Justice, the SEC, FinCEN, which is a treasury, and FINRA, together with international regulators from Asia and Europe. And last week I was at the Library of Congress with a congressman who wants to basically carve out utility tokens and make them unregulated. And what I can tell you is that the biggest challenge we as an industry create security tokens are all about is branding. So I look at security. I look at the purple tokens we create, the ones that let us look into a client's company and to take something from the top line and figure out ways to incentivize their ecosystem to be investors. As a smart security, as a programmable security, that's inherently different than anything you've ever seen before. And yes, I don't mind it being regulated. I also appreciate why a utility token can just work, and why we should actually. So this congressman was suggesting that the conversation was talking about the Howey rules should not apply. But if I'm up on stage hawking, buying the Jeff coin, it's only $1 today, but I promise you it will be $100 by a week from tomorrow. Yes, I'm selling a security. But if I tell you about the Jeff coin because it's helping to drive the Jeff ecosystem, and you want to buy it, it's different. So we have an opportunity. So the big problem with right now with the regulators around the world, and I speak of the people I met, is the SEC, from Valerie's mouth, said, in no uncertain terms, that if you have a utility token deal gone bad, it's a security. That's it. It's a security. Now, that's great. But what about a private placement where I worked with a client on doing a Reg A Plus filing or doing a Reg D, Reg S filing to actually intentionally create a security? Oh, that's a security too. So I believe about life. Life is, for me, it's all about energy, vibration, and frequency. That if you understand where that is for you, and you understand your purpose and intention, you can figure out where you are in the universe. But I'm really confused where I am in the universe today about the classification of securities. Because from a regulator's perspective, they're using the same word, and it doesn't make any sense to me. My ex-wife had diabetes. She was a type 1 diabetic, meaning insulin dependent. But if she didn't get insulin, she died. After going to a lot of diabetes charity events, I can tell you about type 2 diabetes, where your body makes insulin, and if you change your diet, most of the time you actually are fine. 2 different diseases branded under the same terminology. I challenge you to help figure out how to differentiate security tokens or smart tokens or programmable securities as different than utility token deals that have gone bad. Because there's a lot of marketing challenges we're going to have to understand how to deal with that. We also should take advantage of the fact of everyone who came here, who traveled, whether you traveled 5 kilometers, 3 kilometers, or you traveled from around the world, you're here right now. So one of the nice things I enjoy about conferences is not only hearing the speakers, but it's those side conversations you have that just happen, the spontaneous opportunity to have hallway conversations, because that creates business linkages. And as an industry, I implore you, if you can, to find the time to figure out how to contribute to, maybe it's the work of the Blockchain Token Association, at least contribute to what Fran is doing, and help us figure out how we're going to build trading systems of the future on common protocols. How to figure out, we can have different business rules, but common protocols so we can communicate, because while friends of mine are dealing with interchains, as I told people in voice over IP, operability before interoperability. We have to get it fucking working. And it's a lot of work. And it's a lot of work to understand what we don't have. Because in many ways, the emperors around us, we're buck naked. We talk a good game, but we don't have the ability yet to deliver on the vision because we haven't had that chance yet. We need now as the opportunity to actually make that happen. And it can happen, but it's up to you. I'm happy to facilitate some conversations. I am more than happy to help promote the goodwill of what we represent, be the good guys. And I am always looking for members for the BTA because it helps create common ground to where we all at least align on building an industry together. But I do believe that nothing is impossible. Because if anyone would have told me that it's impossible to go to the FCC and in a year's time get a law to come out, I never would have started. But ignorance to me is a bliss. Because if you don't know you can't do something, anything can happen. When we were doing Vonage, and we were trying to hire, we had raised a ton of money, and we're trying to hire the best engineers in the world to make voice over IP happen on broadband, every smart engineer said we can't do it, not possible. We didn't hire them. We ended up hiring college students who didn't know they couldn't do it. And it just worked. And I think the same thing works here today, that to the extent that you have a vested interest, whether you're advisory, whether you're launching ICOs, whether you're helping to manage them or manage the expectations, now's the time as an industry to get together and figure out what we need and don't need and just work on making it all happen. So Fran, thank you for convening us. Thank you all for listening to me. I appreciate your attention. I'm going to be around here the whole time, and I'm grateful to be here. And the Milky Way, which was behind me, I had a life lesson a few times already, where I've learned to enjoy every moment. And so my downtime is spent looking into the universe and chasing the Milky Way wherever I go. So I'm very grateful to be in a place where we actually have dark skies, where you can actually look up and see the center of the universe and understand that we're all made of cosmic dust. And sometimes that relativeness hits us in different ways. But anyway, thank you, Fran. Thank you all for listening, and I'm grateful to be here today.
If you like my channel, please hit the like button and be sure to subscribe. I also have a Patreon account and wanted to give a special shout out to all the awesome people there. And a huge thank you to the sponsors of the show for making these videos possible. Thanks so much for watching.
She used to just party, go all the way.